belum hadir. Bu Isra ini belum, WR4 belum hadir.
Prof, WR4 ada kegiatan bersamaan pagi ini, jadi beliau kirim videonya beberapa hari yang lalu.
Oh iya.
Ada schedule kebetulan bertabrakan.
Ya, kita tunggu-tunggu lagi ini peserta ya.
Mungkin saya bisa coba share screen.
Ya, boleh, Prof.
Saya coba saja.
Oh, sudah kembali begini.
Bagus itu Windows 11. Paketnya pakai juga.
Bebas begini toh.
Sebentar.
Iya. Kenapa itu tadi di sini?
Settingan update Windows-nya kayaknya otomatis. Jadi ketika tersambung ke internet langsung otomatis terupdate ke Windows 11. Tapi bagus ke Windows 11. Versi terbarunya Windows.
Iya. Ada kasih.
Iya.
Bukan dulu cara ini.
Sebelah.
Iya.
Ya. Share screen.
the Honorable Vice Rector of Research, Innovation and Partnership, Universitas
Recording
Hasanuddin,
in progress.
the Honorable Dean of Cultural Science Faculty, Universitas Hasanuddin, the Honorable Speaker and Moderator of our webinar, and the Honorable Guest and Participant. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andi Alia Yusria. It is a wonderful and precious chance for me to be your master of ceremony today. In our webinar with the theme, the uses of the humanities with some reverence to South Sulawesi, organized by the Faculty of Cultural Science, Universitas Hasanuddin, through the World Class University program. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let's say thanks to God who has given us guidance, happiness, health, and mercy, so we can attend and participate in this event virtually. At this beautiful moment, I would like to welcome Professor Charles Campbell McKnight, who will be the speaker of our event today. Selamat pagi, Professor. Nice to meet you. It is a pleasure. Actually, it is a pleasure for Universitas Hasanuddin to have you as a speaker today. And we also would like to welcome all the participants for their presence. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, actually today we have several agendas. So please allow me to read several of our agendas today. The first is opening. The second is remarks. The third is the main agenda, which is a presentation about the uses of the humanities with some reference to South Sulawesi from our speaker, and also discussion. The sixth is photo session, and the seventh is closing. So ladies and gentlemen, let's step on to the next following agenda is remarks. So the first remark is the welcoming remarks that will be delivered by the Dean of Cultural Science Faculty. So I immediately invite Professor Dr. Akinduli MA to give his remark. Please, Professor.
Ya, thank you very much. Terima kasih diberi kesempatan pada pagi hari ini. Ini terdengar ya, terdengar suara saya?
Ya, Prof.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih ya. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Yang saya hormati Bapak WR4, yang saya hormati para dosen. Pada hari ini juga hadir Dr. Nasmila sebagai moderator yang terhormat, teman-teman panitia, hadirin sekalian, para peserta webinar ini yang terhormat, dan yang sangat saya hormati, ini guru saya sebenarnya, Prof. Campbell McKnight ini. Ya, kalau Prof. Campbell ini sudah lama-lama tidak ke Makassar, agak sulit lagi bahasa Indonesianya saya lihat. 2 tahun yang lalu ya Prof. Terakhir kita ketemu di Makassar. Ya, terima kasih Prof. Thank you very much Prof. Campbell McKnight. Ya, nice to meet you today. Ya, senang sekali saya bisa jumpa lagi dengan Profesor. Mudah-mudahan tahun ini bisa ke Makassar lagi, ya, dan terima kasih bersedia membawakan materi pada pagi hari ini. Hadirin sekalian yang saya hormati, Prof. Campbell McKnight ini sebenarnya bagi Sulawesi Selatan tidak asing. Beliau pernah lama tinggal di Makassar bersama dengan UNHAS, melakukan banyak penelitian tentang budaya Bugis Makassar, terutama naskah-naskah Bugis Makassar. Ya. Buku beliau yang terakhir terbit, mungkin ada yang sudah terbit baru ya Prof. Terakhir saya baca bukunya Prof. Campbell tentang Kronik Bone, The Bugis Chronicle of Bone. bersama-sama dengan Pak Mukhlis, Dr. Mukhlis Baini dengan Dr. Mukhlis Hadrawi. Ya, ada juga beberapa tulisan beliau tentang naskah-naskah Bugis. Misalnya yang menarik saya baca itu Parian dalam naskah Bugis yang ditulis oleh beliau, dan masih banyak karya-karya yang lain. Ya, sehingga Prof. Campbell ini bagi kajian-kajian Bugis Makassar ini sangat banyak dirujuk oleh para akademisi, ya, karya-karya beliau, baik itu di bidang ilmu sejarah berkaitan dengan naskah dan kajian-kajian budaya yang lain. Beliau ini salah satu ahli yang banyak dirujuk oleh para akademisi, ya, termasuk kita di kampus-kampus ini. Ya, olehnya itu ketika WR4 meminta ke saya untuk mencari salah seorang pembicara yang akan membicarakan tentang budaya Bugis, saya rekomendasikan beliau, Prof. Campbell Midnight dari NU. Ya, Bapak Ibu semua dan tentunya adik-adik saya mahasiswa yang sempat hadir, mari gunakan kesempatan ini untuk saling diskusi, ya, dengan beliau. Ya, pada hari ini beliau akan membawakan tema tentang nilai-nilai humanisme dalam budaya Bugis. Ya, saya kira budaya Bugis apapun, ya, Bugis Makassar apapun yang dikaji, pasti kita akan ketemu di dalamnya tentang nilai-nilai humanioranya seperti itu. Ya, dan sekira ahlinya seperti Prof. Campbell Midnight akan menjelaskan tentang hal itu. Mari kita gunakan kesempatan ini semua. Sayang setelah saya share ini, rata-rata adik-adik ini ada juga kuliahnya yang bersamaan. Mudah-mudahan setelah selesai perkuliahan yang pertama, banyak yang bisa bergabung. Kepada teman-teman panitia dari kantor pusat, terima kasih atas bantuannya. Ibu Nasmila, terima kasih kesediaannya jadi moderator pada hari ini. Ketika Pak WR4 meminta nama, saya juga tidak terlalu perhatikan bahwa yang jadi pemateri adalah Pak Campbell sebenarnya. Jadi ya, nanti saya lihat di WA, oh ternyata Pak Campbell ini guru kita yang akan membawakan materi. Sekali lagi saya kira terima kasih semuanya, terutama terkhusus kepada Prof. Campbell Midnight. Kami ucapkan selamat datang lagi di Makassar. Ya, welcome to Makassar, welcome to Hasanuddin University. Terima kasih telah bersedia membawakan materi. Thank you very much, Prof. Campbell. Ya, sekian dari saya. Semoga acara ini dapat berjalan dengan lancar. Lebih dan kurangnya saya mohon maaf. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor. The next remark is opening remark. It will be delivered by the Vice Rector of Research, Innovation and Partnership, Universitas Hasanuddin, and continue for the opening of this webinar. However, this remark will be delivered by video because our Vice Rector of Research, Innovation and Partnership has another schedule today. So please play the opening remark video from Professor Dr. Muhammad Nasrul Masih, PhD, Microbiology Clinic Specialist.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable invited speaker, the Honorable Dean of Faculty Cultural Science, and distinguished moderator and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, let us praise and send great gratitude to Allah, the Almighty God, due to His blessing, mercies, and guidance upon all of us, so we can attend this webinar in a healthy condition. On behalf of the university, it is an honor for me to open and welcome you to the Top Scientist webinar series, Faculty of Cultural Science, which is conducted by the world-class university program, Universitas Hasanuddin. Special thanks to Professor Campbell McKnight from Australian National University, Australia, for your presence and agreement to share a valuable topic with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this webinar is entitled The Use of Humanities with some reference to South Sulawesi. Through exploration of the humanities, we learn how to think creatively and critically, to reason and to ask questions. Research into the human experience add to our knowledge about our world. Through the work of humanities scholars, we learn about the values of different culture, about what goes into making a work of art, about how history is made. Future speakers will focus on discussing the importance of the humanities with some reference to South Sulawesi. We ensure that all participants will get more complete information in this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar today is provided by the World-Class University Program of Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology. Through this program, we are being supported to gain more collaboration with international colleagues in scientific activities. Therefore, we count for conduct more collaboration with Australian National University Australia that can be profitable for both of us. And with that, I would like to conclude my remarks and officially open this webinar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. With the blessing of Allah, God Almighty, I officially open this webinar. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's continue to the next agenda, which is the main agenda of today's webinar. So this webinar will talk about the uses of the humanities with some reference to South Sulawesi from our speaker, Professor Charles Campbell McKnight from the Australian National University. And it will be conducted by our moderator, Dr. Nasmila M. Hum, PhD, the lecturer of Cultural Science Faculty, Universitas Hasanuddin. So please welcome our moderator and then also our speaker today. Please, Dr. Nasmila M. Hum, PhD, to conduct this webinar. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I am very pleased to be here today, and of course, I'm very proud to be the moderator of Professor Campbell. How do you want us to call you, Prof?
Campbell. Campbell saja.
Campbell saja, bukan Charles, ya.
Bukan Charles.
Okay. Okay, Prof. Campbell, today we are, of course, overwhelmed with so many interesting topics on humanities, and I hope that today will be the one that everyone is expecting, you know, because we are the Faculty of Cultural Sciences. You know, when we finish our study, we will have Sarjana Humaniora or Magister Humaniora, which is very close to which is actually part of humanities. So I'm very much expecting that today I will learn a lot from you. Of course, the other participants will do the same. And now, before I start, I give the floor to you. I would like to actually introduce Professor Campbell to all the audience. Let's start, yeah. Professor Campbell McKnight was born in Corowa, New South Wales, Australia in 1941. He graduated from the University of Melbourne with honors in Latin and history in 1959. Oh my God, that was a long time ago. And received his PhD in proto-history from the Australian University, National University in 1970. The book, based on his PhD thesis, The Voyage to Marege, which is published in 1976, presents a comprehensive account of the tripang industry carried on along the coast of northern Australia by men from Makassar in the 18th and 19th century. An Indonesian translation was published in 2017. Okay, his first visit to Sulawesi in 1969 was a part of a joint Australian-Indonesian archaeological team investigating Toalean sites. His particular interest, however, is the early history of South Sulawesi between 1000 CE and 1600 CE. This involves combining the evidence of archaeology and Lontaras sources and has led to many publications, especially with friends and colleagues. In 2020, he published with Pak Muhlis Paini and Pak Muhlis Hadrawi, the Bugis Chronicle of Bone, free downloaded from ANU Press. He has visited Sulawesi often over the years and worked closely with generations of local scholars. From 1970 to 1993, he taught in the Department of History, the faculties at Australian National University, and from 1994 to 1999, he was Professor of Humanities at the University of Tasmania. After retiring to Canberra, he has continued his research doing writing and editing. So that's a little glance about Professor Campbell. That's very interesting. I think you know more of our local scholars on this field, yeah, Prof. We really appreciate that. I hope that more works will coming in the very near future. Okay, without further ado, let me allow Professor Campbell to start with his lecture, and I hope that everybody will attend seriously, so we can learn a lot from this presentation. Thank you very much. Time is yours, Prof.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nasmila.
Yes.
And let me greet everyone this morning from a wet day in Canberra. It's raining quite heavily, but also express my thanks to Professor Nasrum, to Andi Alia, and to my old friend, Professor Akinduli. It's nice to find friendly faces. And thank you for all your work in setting this up and for your introductions. Saya minta maaf kalau saya harus berbahasa Inggris, tapi mungkin lebih gampang untuk saya. Maaf.
Of course, Prof, of course.
And I will speak for about maybe 40 minutes. Let me begin by sharing the screen. And now you can see the screen. Can you see
Yes,
my screen?
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Just the title. Now, in 1993, I was appointed to be Professor of Humanities in the University of Tasmania. It was a title of which I was very proud. I enjoyed the freedom and the expansiveness of the term humanities. It also goes back to the beginning of universities as we know them today. One could argue that there was a sort of university in classical Athens, and there was certainly a great center of learning in Baghdad from the 9th century, or Al-Azhar in Cairo, founded in 970 CE. But the direct history of the universities found all over the world today goes back to the University of Bologna in Italy, founded in 1088 CE. And the early universities of Paris or Oxford taught the 7 liberal arts, as they were called. That is, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, followed by arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and musical theory. These human studies were distinguished from theology or studies of the divine. Especially under the influence of classical Greek and Latin sources, which became available in the Renaissance, the university curriculum evolved to include history, philosophy, literature, languages, and cultural studies generally. At first, the focus of interest was mainly on the ancient Greek and Roman world, but in the 19th and 20th centuries, this interest expanded to include the cultural and artistic concerns of all humanity. Humanities is thus a term which includes a very wide range of studies and practice. If you look for definitions, you'll find various lists of areas of study and research, but let's not waste time on definitions. When I first came to Makassar in 1969, a long time ago, I was a graduate of the University of Melbourne, founded in the middle of the 19th century. And I remember giving a talk, I think in the old Sospol building in the center of the city somewhere. This is even before Jalan Sunu and the BUDAYA campus. I gave a talk to an UNHAS audience about my research on the trepang fishermen from Makassar who used to visit Northern Australia. For me, a university such as UNHAS, founded in the middle of the 20th century, was a familiar type of institution, even if there were a few superficial differences deriving from the Scottish-Irish derivation of the University of Melbourne and the Dutch model for UNHAS. The important point is that we all derive from Bologna. That is the concept of an institution devoted to educating the young, preserving learning, and extending it further by study, that is by research. And this concept has spread, I think, to every corner of the earth. Universities are found everywhere. In earlier centuries, they often had some form of religious sponsorship, but they are now usually sponsored by national or local governments or by many kinds of private interest, but sometimes still with religious intent and management. UNHAS, and indeed several other universities in Makassar, are worthy examples of this almost universal concept of a university. Like almost all other universities, UNHAS includes humanities in its range of studies, both in teaching and research, and this is very right and proper. Another point to notice about modern universities is that they are often very large institutions. Admittedly, Australian universities have taken this to an extreme. Monash University, the largest in Australia, has over 80,000 students. The University of Melbourne has over 8,000 staff. Of course, size should not be confused with quality or renown. The Australian National University, with which I've been associated for nearly 60 years, is actually one of the smaller Australian universities, but still very big with over 20,000 students. For Australia as a whole, there are more than 1.5 million students currently enrolled and over 100,000 staff. A striking feature of the students enrolled in Australian universities is that almost 500,000 of them, that's a third of them, are not Australian citizens. Now, other countries too put vast resources into universities, and I see from the website that UNHAS has nearly 40,000 students. It's difficult to determine how many students out of these large totals study humanities in one form or another. For example, when I was at the University of Tasmania, students preparing to be nurses studied history and philosophy, as did students preparing to be school teachers. Here too at UNHAS, I suspect that the study of humanities is not limited to studies in the FAKULTAS ILMU BUDAYA. Now, why are such large resources devoted to the study of the humanities? In what ways is the study of the humanities useful? What is the value of research in the humanities? Now, there's one matter to clear up before trying to answer these questions. So far, I have been talking about universities. Those of us who have grown up in universities and spent our lives working in one or more universities do need to remember that there is a world outside universities. This is true, of course, for all areas of study, research, and mental activity, but perhaps especially so in the humanities. Everyone reads novels or listens to music or has some ideas about the history of the places in which they live. We share cultural interests as a community with other people, and we organise ourselves politically in various ways. One area in which Indonesia is perhaps better organised than Australia is in the many research institutes supported by the Department Pendidikan and Kebudayaan and other bodies. My best view of this comes from my friends in the Balai Archaeology Makassar and the excellent work they have done for many years. Much good research is done in museums, and of course a prime purpose of a museum is to display material for the instruction and enjoyment of everyone. And I'm sure you can think of many more examples of activities in the humanities beyond the concern of universities. My answers to the questions about the usefulness of the humanities applies to these activities outside universities just as much as to what happens within universities. And my answers fall into three broad groups or headings. And the first one is what are generally known as generic skills. That is, skills which are not tied to a particular area of application or knowledge. To put this in the simplest terms, the humanities are very good in teaching you how to think effectively. The slogan, which we all use, we've heard it already this morning, is critical thinking. What we mean by that is identifying and naming an issue which we want to address. What exactly is the question or the problem that we are concerned with? Then we have to find the evidence which might be relevant to the question or problem we have identified, and then carefully assess that evidence, some of which may be irrelevant or of minor significance. Other parts of it will bear directly on the question. Very often someone else will have already asked the same or a similar question, and we might want to know what answer they came to. And finally, we have to be able to present our answer either orally or in writing. And the skills of being able to speak and write effectively need to be developed. There is more to this than just critical thinking. Another generic skill is some understanding of how languages work. Anyone concerned with the humanities in Indonesia has, of course, one huge advantage: Bahasa Indonesia. It seems to me impossible to exaggerate the importance of a language which has been so carefully cultivated to fit it for the modern world, in addition to all its political benefits for the nation. You will all know the story and understand the usefulness of dictionaries, grammars, and government attention to these matters. Non-Indonesians can only admire the application and success of ejaan yang disempurnakan in 1972. All that effort in the old Lembaga Bahasa Nasional paid off and continues to pay off. If we look locally at Makassar and Bugis, there are also some triumphs. The old dictionaries of Mates are remarkable and still essential, though it required the work of Sensa, together with Nuruddin Daeng Magasing, a great scholar Nuruddin, and Abdurrahim, a wonderful man, to sort out the grammar and update the Makassar dictionary. And over the last century, a wide range of linguists, both Indonesian and foreign, have improved our knowledge of these and other Sulawesi languages. The great need, in my view, is an updated and expanded version of Mates Bugis dictionary. And I know something about the new dictionaries which have appeared, but none of them are as full and excellent as Mates. Not all the cases of the application of generic skills have been in recent times. There's no time here to go into the evidence, but I believe that sometime a bit before 1400 CE, a genius, or perhaps more than one genius, had some understanding of linguistics and writing systems and developed the South Sulawesi writing systems, especially Lontera. The Lontera script, and still more the Jangan-Jangan or Old Makassar script, might not be very effective for rendering the Makassar and Bugis languages, though given the nature of the languages, the scripts are just effective enough so that you can read the languages. But also, given the nature of the languages, the Lontera script in particular is spectacularly efficient. Might not be very effective, but it's very, very efficient. Using Lontera, it is possible to convey the language of a Bugis or Makassar text with far fewer marks on the page than in any form of transcription into Latin characters. And this achievement, which gave early Bugis and Makassar society all the benefits of literacy, deserves much greater recognition than it receives in the histories of literacy, or for that matter, in histories of Indonesia. Another generic skill, which can be fostered by the study of the humanities, lies in understanding that society is controlled by codes and protocols. At its most formal, this is the body of civil and criminal law, and that requires elaborate and sustained training. But there are less technical expressions of codes and customs, of adat. Two obvious Bugis examples are firstly the Latoa literature, so well studied by the late Professor Matulada, but there is in fact a much greater body of Latoa material than he was able to analyse, and much more work needs to be done. Secondly, let us celebrate the work of the late Professor Tobing on the Amanagapa Maritime Code. This is an example of really excellent scholarship from the earliest days of UNHAS. There's a lot to be proud of. So there's a long history of governments and others seeking out those trained in the generic skills of an education in the humanities to run their administrations. After all, in most of Europe in the 19th century, a good knowledge of the Greek and Roman classics was thought to be an excellent qualification to run an empire, whether the British Empire or the French Empire, or even some ways the Dutch Empire. Today, in a time of such rapid technological and technical change as we are enduring, it is simply not possible to train young people in the technology and techniques they will need as their career develops. How much longer will we go on using Zoom before it's replaced by something else? Much better to concentrate on developing general principles of thinking and understanding. People well educated in humanities will have no trouble in mastering the training needed for particular tasks. Let me now turn to another broad area of the usefulness of the humanities. I would describe this as the cultivation of the individual imagination. How can we take some aspect of our own nature and experience, and by applying our imagination or the imagination of others, come to live fuller, richer, and more rewarding lives? That sounds very abstract, so let me give you some simple examples. A bit over 2,000 years ago, the Roman poet Catullus wrote about visiting the grave of his brother in what is now northern Turkey. It had taken Catullus considerable effort to get there, and the poem is an expression of solemn and somber grief. I first read it when I was learning Latin at school over 60 years ago, and I've loved it ever since. It has taught me a way to deal with the emotion of grief. I was also learning Latin, which is a very useful generic skill. Secondly, anyone studying English literature will read, or better still, see a performance of some of Shakespeare's plays. In the most beautiful and expressive language, they explore human relationships and emotions. Macbeth, for example, is so obsessed with ambition and goaded on by his wife that he kills the king and becomes king himself, but he is then consumed and destroyed by his feeling of guilt. It is a powerful lesson in human behavior. These are examples of my borrowing, as it were, the imagination of others and making it mine. They are useful to me in living more fully. There are also examples where I've had some direct contact with the material, where a story or painting or film has special meaning for me because it relates to the time and place in which I live and have lived. Rather than explore the details of my life, however, let me offer you some examples which may resonate in some ways for you in Sulawesi. In 2002, at the wonderful Lagaligo seminar and festival at Pejana in Beru, up the coast, there was a performance of the Makassar dance about the hunter who shoots a white heron, the Pakondo Buleng. It immediately brought to my mind the short story by H.J. Frederici, in which the story by H.J. Frederici, in which the hunter, the father, really does shoot and kill the bird, his son. Now, perhaps the colonial era is now sufficiently long ago that you in Sulawesi can appreciate the books of Frederici and, in a sense, make them yours. Somehow, Sungguh Minasa never looks the same when one has read the Raadsman, which is also available as Sang Penasihat. A reading of Frederici's books adds meaning to the experience of living in Sulawesi. Please read Sang Penasihat if you haven't done so already. A second local example is the publication in 2020 of the edition of the Chronicle of Bone, edited by my friends, Dr. Mukhlis Paini and Dr. Mukhlis Hadrawi, which has already been referred to. Now, this seemed a rather specialist work, only of interest perhaps to the few of us working on Bugis history and philology. It was published, however, by ANU Press, which allows free and complete download of all its titles, and it rapidly became a star download. It was downloaded thousands and thousands of times. Now, whether it has been read by all those who downloaded it is perhaps another question. I suspect there are many good Bugis who like to think that they would like to know more of their history, and having access to their copy of this major work is a step toward that. They are looking for the evidence on which to imagine their past, their Bugis past. And the Chronicle is indeed a good read, and it has a role in building Bugis self-esteem. Please read it if you haven't already done so. Now, the third answer to the question about the usefulness of the humanities is one where Indonesia generally has not been very strong in the past, but now seems to be rapidly improving. It also happens to be a matter in which Australia is strong. This is the development of an awareness of others, other cultures, other histories, other places. We all grow up in our own languages and cultures. We are formed by our own experiences. But through the humanities, we can transcend that formation. We can come to appreciate the languages, cultures, and experiences of others. We can broaden our outlook. We can come to see the world differently without in any way devaluing our own experience and outlook. The second kind of answer we discussed above is centered on enriching our own experience. This third kind of answer is the capacity to appreciate others, irrespective of any connection with our own experience or identity. That is, how do we see ourselves in relation to others? Now, a central area of study here is anthropology, especially when understood as ethnography. An excellent example is the work of our friend, the late Christian Pelleras, who saw his research and publication as a dialogue between Bugis society on the one hand and rural French society, which he also studied. He showed Bugis audiences films that he had taken in France, and he showed French audiences films he had taken in Sulawesi. He understood his role to be that of an intermediary, a messenger, if you like, between France and Sulawesi. And he believed that knowledge of each other's society would build mutual respect and tolerance. Now, of course, there are good Indonesian anthropologists studying all sorts of questions relating to Indonesian society. In Sulawesi, we can think of people like Dr. Abu Hamid or Professor Nurul Ilmi Idris and many others. But their work falls into the second kind of answer. They study more or less their own society. This third area is concerned with non-Indonesians studying Indonesian society, and here there is a long list of scholars like Pelleras. Just limiting ourselves to South Sulawesi in recent times, think of Kathy Robinson or Barbara Miller or Jean Amaral or the Rustlers or Toby Volkman or Hetty Noel Pan. Why do scholars in France or Australia or America or Germany or the Netherlands, why do they all think it worth coming to Sulawesi and writing accounts of the societies they find here? What is the usefulness of these accounts? Now, the usual answer to such questions is that knowing about South Sulawesi and the people who live here makes people from other countries more tolerant, perhaps even more wise. Now, they don't want to stage elaborate weddings like the Bugis do. We all know about Bugis weddings, or even elaborate funerals like the Toraja do, and we all know about Toraja funerals. But knowing about such things allows these foreigners to understand more fully what human beings can do. They can imagine seeing the world differently without necessarily wanting or needing to adopt that view for themselves. Another aspect to this is tourism. Why do tourists, both Indonesian and foreign, come to Tanah Toraja? The basic answer is because they have read about it, or perhaps seen views of it on the television in France or Canada or Jakarta or wherever. And they thought that they would find interest and a form of education by visiting Tanah Toraja. And it's very nice anyway. Anthropological research and publications lie behind the brochures and glossy photographs of the travel agents. In that sense, this research can certainly be seen as useful to the tourists themselves, and also, of course, useful to the area visited. Now, a similar case can be made for prehistoric archaeology. Why is that useful and deserve to have money spent on it? What can people who died thousands of years ago teach us? How can they be of interest to us when we do not even know their name, and we certainly could not understand what they had to say? Now, there can be a kind of local pride in this. In Australia, we can be proud that humans arrived more than 50,000 years ago, and they survived. 100 years ago, this was simply not known. But gradually, the archaeologists have found the evidence, with the result that all Australians can now look upon the history and prehistory of the continent in a new light and pride. And I'm old enough to have seen the change and even to have played a very small part in the archaeology. Similarly, in Sulawesi, the results of prehistoric research in the hills of Maros and elsewhere have been spectacular. It is now possible to describe the long story of human presence in this landscape, and even a pre-human past, if one accepts that the Chabengi stone implements can be dated well before 100,000 years ago, which is too early for Homo sapiens to have arrived from Africa. The evidence for the human past in Sulawesi now includes the amazing richness of cave art, as well as stone implements. The stoneworking skill of the people who made Toalian Maros points is extraordinary, even if we still do not understand why these implements are only found in the southwestern corner of South Sulawesi. Only recently, the sites investigated at Malawa, in these sites, we have been able to detect in the archaeological record the arrival of Austronesian-speaking people about 3,500 years ago. And then there's the record of early Bugis and Makassar societies between about 1000 of the Common Era and 1600, which I'm particularly interested in, to say nothing of the history since then. But let's just concentrate for a moment on the distant past. Overall, archaeology in Sulawesi has been a huge success and reflects the long-term collaboration between local archaeologists, both at the Balai Archaeology and Suaka, as well as at Unhas, and foreign friends. It's a testimony to the leadership and wisdom of leaders on both sides over many years. And again, some local pride is in order. All that is happening here. A more significant point, however, is to notice that the understanding we have of these distant times is not in the image of the present. My ancestors came to Australia about 150 years ago, not 50,000 years ago. Similarly, most people who live in Sulawesi today are, for the most part, descended from the Austronesian speakers who arrived about 3,500 years ago, not 50 or 60,000 years ago when the modern humans first arrived. But we study and celebrate these people of those ancient times for their humanity, not for any personal connection or ancestry. They are other from us in very many senses. We appreciate them as human beings. Let me now turn to another example of appreciating the other, where Sulawesi has much to offer the rest of the world, and that is in the Lagaligo tradition. If one looks around the world, there are many cultures with a tradition of telling elaborate stories. Over the last few centuries, many of these oral traditions have come to be written down. Some of these stories are written from the start. Some of the traditions are purely imaginary. Just think of Harry Potter. But some are thought to have some connection with real events. In a European context, the most famous are the two poems of Homer in Greek, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were written down a very long time ago, about 750 before the Common Era. And they are thought to reflect events of about 500 years before that. Though I have to say the details of whether they're really reflecting history are very highly disputed. In an Asian context, there's the Sanskrit tradition, which has produced the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And there's a similar debate about whether they say anything about what really happened. Over the last 100 years, scholars around the world have recorded many such literary creations and analysed them in various ways. By any standards of comparison, the Bugis Lagaligo tradition rates as significant in terms of size, complexity, and literary worth. The many separate stories which form episodes in a huge cycle of narratives evoke an idealized Bugis society. Heroes are driven by the values of that society in which status drives the quest for a suitable marriage partner. Great prows are built and sailed to distant lands. Men pass the time in cockfighting. Lovers meet in high Bugis palaces. The action is largely set not in the later kingdoms of South Sulawesi like Bone or Goa, but in the earlier realms of Luwu and China. Now the Lagaligo manuscripts, most of which seem to have been actually written in the 18th century, clearly fascinated Mathais in the 19th century. And he had the great advantage of working with Wei Cholipujier, who was a great expert. After Mathais came Yonka, though we don't know the names of the scribes who copied out for Yonka the great trove of manuscripts in Leiden. Then Kern's great catalogue was essentially based on Yonka's materials. In later years, there has been the great contributions of the late Mohammed Salim, a wonderful person outside universities, or Sergio Kolhoff, or I remember very fondly Andy Zainal Abidin from Unhas. And wonderfully, there has now been the extensive publication of texts by Fakhruddin Amboenre, especially by Nurhayati Rahman, whom you will all know, Andi Muhammad Akmal, as well as the very useful volumes published by UNHAS and based on the Lagaligo festivals that I mentioned before. And of course, there's been the Robert Wilson theatrical adaptation, of which you've probably mostly heard. One can speak realistically today in a wonderful way of the great field of study of Lagaligology, which is such a lovely word, it needs to be preserved. The Lagaligo tradition, however, is literature, not history. While the tradition in its various forms might be a source of pride for all Bugis, it is actually much more. It is rightly recognized as worthy of UNESCO attention as a gift for all humanity. It sits beside the other great traditions mentioned above. In introducing this third kind of answer to the usefulness of the humanities, I remarked that Indonesia had not been very strong in this area. I hope that what I'm about to say will not cause any offence, and I stress that I'm aware of many changes. But it's my impression that a great deal of the humanities research and teaching in Indonesian universities and public institutions is about Indonesia, even perhaps about the local province. Java is about Java, Sulawesi is about Sulawesi, and so on. There are, of course, good reasons for this in the history of Republik Indonesia, and as I have already suggested, there is a wealth of material on which to draw. But I would contrast this with my own education. When I was growing up in Australia, almost all my education, whether history, literature, music, art, or even languages, was about Europe. I knew relatively little about Australia, and even less about Indonesia and other parts of Asia. My experience was Australian, but I studied Europe. When I first went to Europe, aged about 23, suddenly I experienced a very strange sensation. Suddenly my actual experience of being in the place matched my learning about the place. Let me give you a trivial example. In Australia, the direction north is associated with hot weather, and the sun shines in the north. The south is cold and Antarctica. In Europe, all this is reversed. The sun shines in the sunny south, and summer is in July, not January, just as it is described in all the books I had been reading as a boy. Of course, I benefited hugely from my humanities education in European culture, but this was quite different from my experience as a boy. Now, many young Australians study Indonesian history, literature, music, art, and languages to receive the same kinds of benefit of a humanities education. Or it might be Chinese or Japanese or Indian or whatever, as well as Europe. But are young Indonesians, specifically students at UNHAS, are they getting such an education? Or rather, are enough students studying the humanities? Not just generic skills and knowledge of their own history, culture, and language, but are they studying the other? Are they studying anthropology of peoples all over the world? Or are they studying European archaeology as well as Sulawesi archaeology? Or are they studying the other great literary traditions I have mentioned above, and so on? If the Australian National University has many students and staff studying Indonesia, can UNHAS have an Australian Studies department in return? Now, of course, I'm aware of the FAKULTAS ILMU BUDAYA, and I can see its 9 sections listed on the website. And the friends I know who are on the faculty staff are excellent scholars. But is this enough? And is the faculty sufficiently recognised for its usefulness? After all, Makassar is a relatively rich and successful city in Indonesia. And Indonesia is now a relatively rich and very successful nation. How can students and scholars in today's Makassar enjoy and benefit from the whole world's store of humanities, knowledge, and understanding? Now, let me end with a little story. The other day, when I was thinking about these matters, I was talking with an Indonesian student who had recently arrived at ANU to enroll for his PhD. I was very impressed by his intelligence, his excellent English, and especially that he had a master's degree in American studies and had spent some months in America. He displayed all the uses of the humanities in full measure. He showed me that things have got very much better than when I first talked to an UNHAS audience over 50 years ago. So let me now say terima kasih and plenty of questions, please. And I will stop sharing.
All right, thank you so much indeed, Professor Campbell. That was a very interesting, very inspiring presentation. 1 hour, exactly 1 hour. That was, you know, the lesson that we can learn from this presentation is overwhelming. So I could pinpoint some important aspects that you have raised, and it's all about, you know, the coverage of humanities in the human life. It's interesting to see that every aspect that we go through in our daily life is actually about the humanities. Is it true? And it's also very interesting that, you know, your last point that you said, that Indonesia actually, you know, this is quite unfortunate that Indonesian students only concentrate on Indonesian studies. Why not, you know, broadening their knowledge about other worlds? Because this is also part of humanities, where we understand, you know, we are aware that we understand about others. So the awareness of others is also part of your beautiful lecture today. So let's just open question and answers. I think I would like to, I haven't seen any chats say asking questions, but I would like to invite anyone in the audience to raise question if you have one. Anyone wants to ask questions?
Yes, ma'am, I can go first if it is okay.
Oh, sure. Where are you?
I am here.
That's it.
All right. Oh, okay, yes. Irma, is it? Oh, no. It's Bessa, sorry. Yes, okay, Bessa, yes, time is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. Hi, Campbell, how are you? I hope you still remember me. We actually met at ANU a couple of years ago. That was your presentation just now was incredible. Thank you so much for that. I think let's go straight to my questions. My questions is that when you say that knowing others is actually part of what humanities can do to us, I just wondering, is there any proportion actually that we can say that you share your story about as an Australian? When you're younger, you're actually know more about European rather than your own culture. So what do you think about it? Like, is there any proportion that we should know our own culture first and then we go and learn others? Or should we do it at the same time? Or what it is? I mean, like, how is there any proportion of this? Like, we need to know that in the same time, or we need to know more about our culture first, and then we go and learn and compare it to another culture. I guess that was just my first thinking when I heard that. I actually agree that as a student, when I was growing up in the high school, we don't have any word history subject. We do have history in our subject that time, but then we don't have any word history. I don't know more about what happened and stuff. We don't have the special subject for this. So I actually agree with you when you say that we as Indonesian student that time, we don't really know what happened outside our work, or like for history, for example. So yes, my questions is there any proportion that we need to know our own culture first, and then we go and learn others, or should we do it at the same time? So yeah, I hope you can understand my questions. Thank you.
Let me answer that question straight away, because
Sure.
I think the real answer is that you have to do it right through the educational stream. That you have to do both at the same time. I know, for example, Indonesians are often surprised to discover that there are tens of thousands, I don't know, and there should be lots more, students in SD, in primary school, learning Indonesian. Now, sometimes it's Salamat Pagi and Terima Kasih and so on. I mean, it's awful, but it's something. They realize it's possible to communicate in a language other than English. And you do need to build into school curriculums some knowledge of the other. There's a big debate going on in Australia at the moment about a new national curriculum. How much of what should go into the curriculum? And there's let me tell you a funny story. If I tilt my screen like that, can you see the wayang figure on the back wall? This was hanging in a room when I was in Tasmania. And a friend came in, and she was a PhD. She had studied Shakespeare. She was a very well-educated woman. And she looked at that and said, "What's that?" Well, I said, it's a wayang figure, you know, shadow puppet, you know, all that sort of. What's that? What's the story? Well, I said, well, it's actually Hanuman, no, the monkey that goes, and the Ramayana goes to Lanka and discovers, you know, Sita and all this. What's that? Now, she had no idea. She had never heard of the Ramayana. This very well-educated woman had never heard of what must be the most popular story in the world. Right? And it was extraordinary. And I thought, how can you teach people about the Ramayana and also about Shakespeare? Now, I don't really know the answer to that, but you must try to teach people about Ramayana and about Shakespeare. And I really love that Hanuman, because it was given to me by a very good Indonesian friend who I think has died back in the 70s, it must have been.
Okay.
So I think that's the answer to your question. You have to keep doing both.
Okay, thank you so much, Bessa Sharif. Yeah, that was an interesting question. Yes, the proportion should be, I think, similar, because you know you need to understand yours first before you can understand others, right? How can you appreciate others if you don't appreciate yours first? I think we have to start from our own culture first. Okay. Maybe we have another question. Anyone raising hands? Not yet. Okay, while waiting for the others to ask questions, allow me to ask questions myself for you, Professor Campbell. You know, I'm very, you know, I'm really, really happy with what you have presented, and I'm very also proud of you that you, you know, you actually cover the whole range of knowledge on humanities, not only on Australians, but these special references to Sulawesi, to South Sulawesi, gives me a great inspiration that actually we have a lot to do. We can have, you know, we can dig more knowledge on the topic, on the issues on humanities. Now, my question is, when you say education about humanities in UNHAS is not probably not
Sorry, there seems to be a problem with the transmission.
I think Ma'am Nasmila have some problem with her internet.
Okay, sorry, I have a problem with my connection. Okay, so yes, sorry, let me just repeat my question. Now, you mentioned just now that that humanities in UNHAS is probably not yet taken very seriously. What is the strategy that you would like to share with us to make that balance? I mean, to make the knowledge or science about humanities being balanced with the other knowledge?
Let me answer that a little bit indirectly.
Okay.
And that is that if I think of the students over the years who have, whom I have taught about Sulawesi, and who have read earlier versions of the Chronicle of Bone, and I've lectured about all sorts of things. What are they doing now? They're not necessarily become academics. And some of them have. I remember teaching Sharon Graham, if you know Ibu Sharon, who's now an associate professor at Monash and doing very well. That's a great success.
Yeah, it is.
Most of these students have gone into government jobs in Canberra, or they've gone teaching, or they've gone into business or whatever, because it's the skills they've learned, the generic skills they've learned, that really make them valuable to employers and to administrators, whether in government or in business or wherever. And I think people in the humanities need to be more, perhaps a bit aggressive, and saying, we're really teaching people what they need to know. The generic skills are really, really useful. And to get that point over. Yeah. This has been taken to what I think is a very good conclusion at the University of Melbourne, and also at the University of Western Australia, which I think are two excellent universities. At the University of Melbourne now, they completely reformed their pattern of education so that they have very few first degrees. I think it's only 6. And those degrees are just for 3 years. So everybody does a first degree. Now, there is no first degree in medicine or law or engineering or architecture, all those technical things.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a bit of teaching in those areas, but after 3 years, when you've learned how to learn, where you've got various generic skills, you then do a second degree, which is when you learn all the material that you have to know about being a lawyer or being a doctor or whatever, all the technical stuff. But the first degree is essentially generic skills. And of course, humanities play a major part in that. Now, when you ask, what should people at UNHAS do? Well, one answer is follow the Melbourne model, which is which is actually the European model. Out of Bologna. It's the but that might be unrealistic. But I do think one has to realize that if you're at UNHAS studying, well, German or French or anthropology or whatever, as you can, then that's not just value. It's not the subject value which is valuable, but it's the process of learning which is valuable. Because after all, if you learn French or Russian or Chinese or something at UNHAS, you may be posted in the diplomatic service to Japan or Brazil and have to learn Japanese or Portuguese. If you've learnt one language, you can learn another language. But what's pathetic are these people who think they're educated and can only speak English. That's pathetic. They're not educated.
Okay.
Well, I can read a couple of other languages. I'm ashamed of my Indonesian.
But your Indonesian is very good. I mean, maybe because you've been dealing with so many people from Indonesia, so the language sounds very clear. So it's good. Yes. Oh, thank you so much for answering my question. I'm still expecting more questions from the audience. Anyone wants to ask questions?
I'm interested to know, would anyone like a Department of Australian Studies at UNHAS?
That's true, yeah. I think we have it now, Australian Studies, yeah.
There's some connection with the Consul General.
Yeah, so far we had American Studies already for the concentration of literature, but I'm not sure about the rest. So it's good that we all agree that learning language is one of an important part of studying, and also because one of the generic skills is about how to think critically. That is also probably one of the weaknesses in Indonesian education, because it didn't start from the beginning. I mean, it should have started from elementary school, I guess, where students are not really overwhelmed with very heavy subjects, but they need to be able to start, with a very simple thing, but they can develop their thinking, critical thinking, better. I think we have one question now from from Ayu Azharia,
Yeah.
Okay, let me just read it for you. I'm Ayu Azharia, from Department of Japanese Language and Culture. I would like to ask you a question about trend of Indonesian studies as well as South Sulawesi studies, especially among Australian scholars. The trend, is it declining in those? Is there any decline in those studies? could you explain why does it happen? Or probably you could suggest how to overcome this. I think okay, it is. It is, if it is improving, could you explain what kind of improvement is there, and how can we participate on these studies? Did you get that, Prof?
Yes, I can see it on the screen too.
Yeah, all right then. Yes.
Yes, and that's a very good and interesting question. So thank you very much for that. And I'm really pleased. And well, I know that Japanese is taught at UNIVERSITAS, and that's exactly, of course, the sort of thing we're talking about. The Australian situation is interesting. Back in the 1960s and 70s, there was a great enthusiasm for Asian studies in Australia and great growth. This was seen as in a sense of Australia coming of age. There was an expansion in Australian education overall, and a lot of this was seen as we must do new things and interact with Asia, and especially Indonesia. And of course, there's been the long history of contact with Indonesia going back a long time. I like to say that prehistoric archaeology in Sulawesi is the longest active collaboration between Australians on the one hand, when Fred McCarthy went to Sulawesi in 1937, which is something I'm very interested in, and the then archaeologists in Sulawesi, Van Stein-Kallenfels and Willems, but also Nuruddin Daeng Magasing was very important in the archaeology then. And so since 1937, there has been continual collaboration, and everyone has known everyone else. I mean, when I first went in 1969, it was with Arpe Suyono and Teguh Asma from the museum in Jakarta and wonderful Basuki. And of course, it goes on today very actively. So there was a great enthusiasm in the 1960s and 70s, and this grew, and lots of school children learned Indonesian, and there were big Indonesian enrollments, and lots of people appointed to universities and famous, professors working on Indonesia, people like James Fox or Herb Feith or Jamie Mackey or so on and so on, and lots of Indonesians like at ANU, the wonderful Dr. Supomo, working on Kekawan and so on. One could go on with lots of names. Now, it's true that for various reasons, in the last 20 years, there's been decline. Not so many students want to learn Indonesian for whatever reason. And there haven't been the positions for so many staff. If you go to seminars now in Indonesia, lots of the people there are already retired and pensioned like me.
Yeah.
There's a big, it's very difficult to know really what has caused this. Some of it has been unfortunate politics or the Bali bombing, or people think Indonesia's a dangerous place. Australian Foreign Affairs warns people against going into Indonesia. Well, I must say, I think it's ridiculous that I can walk down the street in Makassar without feeling afraid. The other thing that has happened is that there's a great trend for people to study international relations and management and stuff like this, all of which people studying international relations who know nothing about any other country. It's so superficial and easy. Now, and I look at all the manuscripts in the library, or the microfilms of manuscripts in the library for the Australian National University, and I think, who's ever going to read all these Javanese manuscripts from the HASANUDDIN in Jogja, or the Bugis and Makassar manuscripts from the Yayasan Kebudayaan in Makassar.
Yep.
There's lots and lots to be done, but there's no great enthusiasm, especially for the classical, the older studies, or the hard stuff, the really difficult stuff, which is really rewarding. At the same time, there are lots of people in Australia interested in Indonesia all the time. There are all the people who have studied. There still are lots of school children learning Indonesian. There still are study of Indonesia in lots and lots of different Australian universities. So it hasn't gone away entirely. But at the moment, it's, I think, in a bit of a dip.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting thing about this is that there are Indonesians in Australia who study Indonesia, whether they're postgraduate students or indeed staff studying all sorts of aspects of Indonesia. But there are also quite a lot of Australians studying Indonesia, Anglo-Australians like me. Whereas if you compare it with China particularly, most of the people studying China, or especially Korea, have Chinese heritage or Korean heritage in one way or another. Lots of Japan is interesting because there are lots of Australians also studying Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So Japanese is in some way a bit more like Indonesia, whereas China and Korea are different because they're basically studied by people with Chinese or Korean heritage. So the answer to the question is a very complicated one. And I wish I knew how there could be more people reading Bugis manuscripts.
Yeah, right. It is true. Okay, so I think yes, I think you have already answered that question very comprehensively. I guess there is another. Oh no, this is just. Thank you very much. One of my motivation to ask these questions because in Japan, Indonesian studies are declining in quantity right now, and vice versa. I participate in one of focus group discussion. As you mentioned, there is no significant increasing number of scholars in these studies. Okay. Yes, of course, we hope that more scholars will be coming in the near future and concentrate on both their own culture and also other cultures, because we are living in a very dynamic environment, and we all need to understand each other much better. Okay, so I guess what one of the ideas of why it's declining is, as what Prof. Campbell has already mentioned, is a political situation. I think that's also one of the most challenging stuff that we actually facing at the moment. But again, I would just like to add a little bit more that we are now, I'm now cooperating with Australian University, Monash University, in doing some research, but still the focus is Indonesia. So I hope that the scholars in Australia will be more interested to come to Indonesia and study about Indonesia. Because I myself, Prof. Campbell, when I did my PhD in Newcastle University in Australia, I studied about Indonesia and I brought all my data along to Australia, and I started, analyzing everything in Newcastle University. So yes, this is quite an ironic, if I could say. All right. Since there is no more questions from the audience, I think I would like to thank.
Ma'am.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I think there is raised hand, Irma Zafitri.
Oh.
You
oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't see that. Yes. Okay. So sorry about this. Irma Safitri. Yes. Time is yours. You may ask question. Okay.
Thank you, Ma'am Nasmila and Professor Campbell. Actually, there are so much things happening in my brain when I listen to your presentation. That's why it takes time to think, because there are a lot of resources that you've mentioned. You mentioned about history, archaeology, literature, language, and all the things like anthropology and all the things that I enjoy a lot. You mentioned about awareness of others without devaluing our own culture, which is very important nowadays. As a teacher, I saw there are so many difference in the students in terms of how they learn in relation with how they apply the humanities studies that they got in the university. And it makes me reflect to myself on what I have experienced when I went to the university taking my bachelor degree. And I think you're right. By having more experience talking or going overseas is not only to learn about other people's culture, but to understand our own selves, like our own culture. And by doing that, when you come back to your own country, it's either you will be more respectful to your own culture or vice versa. But I think by the time you will be able to embrace all those things, that every culture has their own pros and cons, and that's how the word works, right? But then when you mention also about what's the challenge of Indonesian not very much putting effort, I could say, in terms of humanities studies, I think that's very complicated. They are maybe more interested in studying technical studies because it's also dealing with the jobs in the real world. So I think it's very complex. Maybe they enjoy studying humanities, but in fact, the job application is not very much cover what they actually learn in the university. So I think that's the thing that we have to work on together, not only the society and the university, but also the government. Also, when you mention about sorry, maybe it's not like a question, it's just like a sharing what I've been thinking so far about these studies and how these studies can be more beneficial and more interested for young students to take as the major. Yeah, what do you think about how us as a teacher, for example, to spread the ideas of humanities in a wider context? I mean, how these humanities studies would be more relevant and beneficial, not only in the university, but outside of the university, like as a human beings, not only like as a scholar or as a student, but as a humankind. Because I think to the further extent, that's what we need as a human. You also mentioned about tolerance and like understanding each other's, something like that. So I think that's not only for those who studies humanities, but for all the humankinds. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for that. You asked for suggestions, and yes, it helps if government acknowledges the humanities and their value and so forth. The other target audience, if you like, are businessmen, particularly people in big business. Get people who are highly successful businessmen to acknowledge, one, the value of humanities, but also to actually employ humanities graduates in their companies and businesses, and get them to acknowledge that training in good generic skills makes you more successful in business, that businessmen are looking for people with generic skills, not necessarily technical skills, which go out of date very quickly. So that's an audience to sell our message to. But you stated very accurately as to it is difficult to get people to understand it, but it's nonetheless true that humanities are really valuable and useful.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So are you? Yes.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ma'am Nasmila.
Okay. Thank you very much, Irma Zavitri. Yeah, that was a very good question as well, and it's been elaborated in a very excellent way by Prof. Campbell. So, yes, anyone else wants to ask question? I guess there's no more. So far, we have about 3-4 questions only coming from the audience. So by now, I think we come to the end of the session for the main agenda. I would like to return this back to the committee. Is that okay? Or do you want, so you are going to close down the seminar, right?
Yes,
Yes,
we will
okay.
close because we still have several agendas like photo session, ma'am. So
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
okay. I will conduct.
Yes, thank you so much indeed. Okay, once more, Prof. Campbell, thank you very much indeed for the beautiful lecture today, and also to all the participants. Thank you so much for asking questions, for being very attentive. Now I would like to return the session to the committee. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for our moderator and also for our speaker. It was such an informative presentation and also very interesting topic. So for the next agenda, we will show you first the appreciation certificate that we have provided for you. So maybe Israini, could you share the screen of Professor Campbell McKnight certificate for today's webinar? Okay. Okay, so this is the certificate of appreciation for Professor Campbell McKnight. Thank you very much for your availability today and for your informative information for us. We hope that we can still meet in the next occasion maybe, and also we will send this certificate to you by your email. So maybe after this webinar, we will send it directly to you. Okay, so we would like thanks to everyone here for your presence. But before we end this webinar, let's take a photo together. So everyone, ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your camera because we will have a photo session. Maybe we can wait like around 10 seconds or 15 seconds for waiting, ladies and gentlemen, to turn on the camera. Okay. Okay, so maybe we can start to take the picture. We have 3 pages here, so I will start from the page 1. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, smile, 1, 2, 3. Okay, continue to the next page. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and the last page. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 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 Before we end this webinar, maybe Professor Akinduli, do you have like a closing remarks maybe for this webinar? Professor?
Sorry. Prof. Akinduli is now in different place.
Oh, okay,
but
okay, okay.
He actually asked me to.
Oh, okay, ma'am.
Yeah,
okay, please, ma'am.
To do the closing. That's why
okay.
I was asking
okay.
you.
Okay, please, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, once more, I would like to say thank you very much indeed to Professor Campbell. We are expecting your visit in the near future to Makassar, and we probably will take you out to the places to do anapat tilas or nostalgia. Maybe if you have time. Yes, thank you very much. Now, as we have learned a lot from this presentation, from this lecture, allow me to officially close this webinar by reciting Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Campbell.
Okay, so we do, as the name of a committee, we do apologize for any mistakes during this event. Thank you very much for your kind attention, everybody, and see you on the next occasion. Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.